You weren't born behind. Let that land for a second. You weren't born behind. You weren't dealt a bad hand. You didn't miss the window. But somewhere along the way, between the bills, the Instagram feeds, the cousins who made it, and the job that never quite paid enough, you started believing that wealth was for a different kind of person. Someone sharper. Someone luckier. Someone who knew something you didn't. And here's what nobody tells you. They did know something you didn't. Not a secret investment. Not a family connection. Not crypto in 2013. Something older. Something darker. Something that lives in the way they think, long before it ever shows up in their bank account. I've spent years watching people build wealth fast. Not influencers. Not gurus. Real people. Quiet people. People who drove average cars and lived in average houses and then, one day, weren't average anymore. And the pattern isn't what you'd expect. It never is. Stay with me. There's a word that gets thrown around a lot when people talk about wealth. Discipline. And every time I hear it, I think about how wrong we've got it. Discipline sounds like suffering. It sounds like waking up at 5 a.m. when you don't want to. Eating plain chicken and rice. Saying no to things you love. Grinding until your hands bleed and your eyes hurt and you've convinced yourself that pain equals progress. That's not what I saw in the people who built wealth fast. What I saw was something quieter. Something more uncomfortable to admit. They had made peace with being misunderstood. Not accepted it reluctantly. Not tolerated it. Made peace with it. Like a man who walks into a room and doesn't need anyone to acknowledge him. He already knows why he's there. Most people spend an enormous amount of energy managing how others see them. They buy things to signal success before they've built it. They talk about their plans to feel the approval before the result arrives. They stay in careers, cities, relationships, not because it's working, but because leaving would require an explanation they're not ready to give. The people who build wealth fast stopped asking for permission a long time ago. Not out of arrogance. Out of clarity. There's a difference. Arrogance is noise. Clarity is silence with direction. They moved while others were still building consensus. They made decisions that looked reckless from the outside and felt inevitable from the inside. They learned to sit with disapproval the way a sailor learns to sit with open water, not comfortable, exactly, but no longer afraid. And that single shift, that willingness to be misread, created space. Space that most people fill with validation seeking. They filled with work, with learning, with compounding. You can't do both. That's the part nobody posts about. Here's something that will sound strange at first. The people who build wealth fast are not optimists. They're not the ones with vision boards and morning affirmations and relentless belief that everything is going to work out. That's not what drives them. In fact, if you sat down with most of them, really sat down, coffee on the table, no cameras, they'd tell you something closer to the opposite. They assume things will go wrong. Not as a fear. As a system. There's a specific kind of thinking that psychologists call defensive pessimism. The idea that before you move, you map the ways you can fail. Not to scare yourself out of moving. To remove the surprise when something breaks. Because something always breaks. Most people treat failure like a betrayal. Like the universe promised them something and didn't deliver. So when the business slows down, when the investment drops, when the plan unravels, they collapse. Not because the setback was fatal. Because they never saw it coming. The quiet wealth builders? They already buried that version of events weeks ago. They grieved the failure before it happened. So when it arrived, they were already on the other side of it. Think about what that does to your decision making. When you're not afraid of losing, you stop playing defense. You stop hesitating at the door. You stop waiting for certainty that was never going to come anyway. Certainty is a luxury that poor thinking sells and rich thinking never buys. What they buy instead is preparation. And then they move anyway. There's a version of courage that looks like fearlessness. That's not what this is. This is the man who is afraid, genuinely afraid, and has already decided it doesn't matter. He's going to move regardless. Because the cost of staying still finally outgrew the cost of being wrong. That's the shift. That's the thing nobody teaches you. Fear doesn't disappear. You just stop giving it a vote. Let me tell you about a trap. A very specific, very invisible trap. It's called the identity of almost. You've seen it. You've probably lived it. I know I have. It's the person who reads every book about investing but never opens an account. Who researches business models for 3 years and never registers the company. Who knows more about nutrition than most dietitians but hasn't changed what's in their fridge. Who talks about moving cities, changing careers, starting over, with such detail, such passion, such convincing language, that the conversation itself becomes a substitute for the action. Almost. Always almost. And here's the dark part, and I mean genuinely dark, the identity of almost feels good. It carries the social rewards of ambition without the vulnerability of commitment. People respect you for your plans. They admire your research. They call you smart. And smart, in this context, becomes a cage built from compliments. The people who build wealth fast burn that identity down. Not gradually. Not with a transition plan. They burned it. Because they understood something brutal about time. That every year you spend being almost as a year of compounding you will never get back. Money compounds. Skills compound. Reputation compounds. But so does delay. So does hesitation. So does the slow, quiet accumulation of years spent at the edge of your own life, never quite stepping in. There is no elegant way to say this. At some point, you have to become someone who does things. Not someone who is about to. Not someone who is thinking about it. Not someone who would, under the right conditions, when the timing is better, when the kids are older, when the market stabilizes. Now, the people who build wealth fast are not smarter than you. They are not more talented. They are not luckier, or not only luckier. They just stopped living in the conditional tense. They traded I would for I did. And that single grammatical shift changed everything that came after. The world doesn't reward intention. It never has. It rewards the thing that actually exists. The business that actually launched. The investment that actually got made. The conversation that actually happened. Everything else is just a very detailed dream. There's a relationship that nobody talks about when they talk about wealth. The relationship with discomfort. Not pain. Not sacrifice. Discomfort. That specific feeling of being in a situation where you don't fully belong yet. Where you're learning something and you're bad at it. Where you're in the room but not quite of the room. Where you can feel the gap between who you are and who you're trying to become, and that gap has a texture, a weight, a low hum that follows you around. Most people exit that feeling as fast as possible. They call it knowing their limits. They call it being realistic. They call it self-awareness. And sometimes it is those things. But more often, much more often than we admit, it's just discomfort wearing a reasonable disguise. The people who build wealth fast have a different relationship with that hum. They don't enjoy it. Don't let anyone convince you they do. There's no secret personality type that finds discomfort pleasant. What they have instead is a longer time horizon for relief. They've trained themselves, consciously or not, to delay the moment they exit the uncomfortable room. One more hour. One more week. One more iteration. And in that extended exposure to discomfort, something happens that can't be shortcut. Competence. Real, unremarkable, unglamorous competence. The kind that doesn't look impressive in a photo but shows up in results over years. Here's the paradox that took me a long time to understand. The people who are most comfortable with discomfort end up living the most comfortable lives. And the people who escape discomfort at every turn end up trapped in the most uncomfortable situation of all, a life that never quite opened up. A potential that stayed potential. A version of themselves they can almost remember wanting to be. There's a cost to comfort seeking that never appears on the receipt. It gets charged later. Quietly. With interest. And by the time most people feel it, really feel it, they've spent decades making withdrawals from a future they didn't know they were borrowing against. The dark psychology of wealth isn't about being ruthless or cold or willing to step on people. It's simpler than that. And harder. It's the willingness to stay in the room when every instinct tells you to leave. To keep going when the result isn't visible yet. To trust the process even when the process feels like nothing is happening. Because nothing happening is often exactly what compounding looks like from the inside. I want to talk about something that makes people uncomfortable when I bring it up. Desire. Not ambition. Not goals. Not vision. Desire. The raw, unpolished, almost embarrassing want for something more. The thing you feel at 2 a.m. when the house is quiet and you're honest with yourself in a way you can't afford to be during the day. Most people have been taught to manage that feeling down. Be grateful for what you have. Don't be greedy. Count your blessings. And look, there's real wisdom in gratitude. I'm not arguing against it. But somewhere along the way, gratitude got weaponized. It became a tool for keeping people still. For convincing them that wanting more was a character flaw instead of a human instinct. The people who build wealth fast never apologized for wanting more. They held both things at once. Gratitude for where they were. Hunger for where they were going. Not as a contradiction. As a fuel system. Because here's what unmanaged desire actually does. When you don't suppress it, when you don't dress it up in spiritual language or drown it in distraction, it becomes information. It tells you exactly where your energy wants to go. It points, with unusual precision, toward the thing you're actually built to pursue. Most people never find out what that thing is. Not because they lack desire. Because they spent years talking themselves out of listening to it. In the market, whether we're talking about business, investments, careers, or relationships, the market rewards people who know what they want. Clearly. Specifically. Without apology. Vagueness is expensive. The person who says I want to be financially comfortable someday and the person who says I want to own 3 income-producing properties by the time I'm 35 are not playing the same game. They're not even on the same field. Specificity forces confrontation. It turns a dream into a gap. And a gap, a real, measurable, undeniable gap between where you are and where you want to be, is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology. It creates tension. And tension, properly directed, moves things. The people who build wealth fast live in that tension. They don't resolve it prematurely with positive thinking. They don't numb it with consumption. They let it work on them. They let the gap pull them forward the way gravity pulls water downhill. Not forced. Not manufactured. Just inevitable. That's the word that kept coming back to me when I studied these people closely enough. Inevitable. Not because they were special. Because they had aligned their desire, their clarity, and their tolerance for discomfort into something that moved in one direction. Consistently. Quietly. Without needing applause. And the world, eventually, has no choice but to respond to that kind of person. If you've made it this far into the video with me, and I mean really made it, not just had it playing in the background while you scrolled, I want to take a second to invite you to subscribe to this channel. Not because of the numbers. Not because it helps an algorithm somewhere. Because if what we've talked about today landed, if even one thing shifted something in the way you see yourself and money and the life you're building, then you already know this is the kind of conversation worth continuing. Every day. Hit that button. Stay in the room. And look, I know what some of you are feeling right now. Because I've felt it too. You're nodding along. You recognize yourself in some of this. The almost. The comfort seeking. The desire you've been taught to quiet down. And there's a part of you that's asking the question that always comes at this point in a conversation like this one. Okay. But where do I actually start? And that's exactly where this gets real. Because starting isn't a strategy. Starting is a decision. And decisions don't need perfect conditions, they need a clear enough reason and a low enough threshold. The people who build wealth fast didn't start when they were ready. Nobody ever is. They started when the cost of not starting finally became more unbearable than the fear of beginning. That moment looks different for everyone. For some it's a number on a bank statement that finally tells the truth. For some it's watching someone younger, with less experience, with no obvious advantage, just move. Just do it. Just begin. And something in you cracks open that you can't close again. For some it's quieter than that. A Tuesday afternoon. Nothing dramatic. Just a decision made in a kitchen or a parking lot or a bathroom mirror. A decision that nobody witnessed but that changed the entire trajectory of what came next. The architecture of a life built on wealth doesn't begin with a breakthrough moment. It begins with a private one. A moment between you and yourself where you finally stop negotiating with the version of you that is afraid and start listening to the version of you that already knows what needs to happen. That version has been waiting. It's not impatient. It's not angry. It's just there. Steady. Certain in the way that only very quiet things are certain. And it's been waiting longer than you think. Here's what I didn't tell you at the beginning of this video. The dark psychology of people who build wealth fast isn't dark because it's secret. It isn't dark because it's dangerous. It isn't dark because it belongs to a different kind of person than you. It's dark because it requires you to see yourself clearly. And clear sight, real, unfiltered, no excuse clarity about who you are, what you've been avoiding, and what you're actually capable of, is one of the most uncomfortable things a person can experience. Most people never go there. Not fully. They get close and then they find something to look at instead. A screen. A conversation. A reason why now isn't the right time. But you're still here. And I don't think that's an accident. The people who build wealth fast aren't operating on a different planet. They're operating on the same one you are, with the same 24 hours, the same doubts, the same market, the same uncertainty about the future. The difference was never the opportunity. It was the decision about what kind of person they were going to be before the opportunity arrived. Wealth doesn't build the person. The person builds first. Quietly. In private. In the decisions nobody sees and nobody applauds and nobody validates. And then, one day, the outside catches up to the inside. It always does. There's a verse that has stayed with me through everything I've studied about this. Proverbs 13 verse 11. Wealth gained hastily will dwindle, but whoever gathers little by little will increase it. Read that again. Not as a warning. As a blueprint. Little by little. The most unglamorous, unsexy, unpostable strategy in the world. And the only one that actually works. You already know what to do. You've known for longer than you've been willing to admit. If this video said something that needed to be said, hit that subscribe button and share it with 5 people who need to hear it. Not because I'm asking. Because you already know who they are. And drop a comment below. Not great video. Tell me something real. Tell me what shifted. Tell me what you're going to do differently. And tell me, what do you want us to talk about next? I'll be here.